Hello and welcome to the Battle of the Yellow Sea. In August 1904, Japanese land forces had advanced to Port Arthur and were shelling the anchorage. The Tsar personally telegraphed Admiral Witgeft, ordering him to sail for Vladivostok immediately. Weighing anchor early on the 10th of August, Witgeft attempted to avoid the waiting Japanese fleet. However, Admiral Togo was warned of the approaching Russians and set a course to intercept. For this scenario, the Russian fleet will consist of 5 battleships and 3 protected cruisers, while the Japanese will have 4 battleships and 2 armoured cruisers. Hopefully the mismatch here will be offset by the fact that Admiral Togo is an exceptional admiral. Victory conditions are that half a fleet's ships are silenced, crippled or sunk at the end of any one turn. We're on the high seas in the Yellow Sea. The Russians will be coming from the top left-hand corner of the table, and the Japanese the top right-hand corner of the table. A quick reminder of some of the rules with White Bear Red Sun. It's a fairly easy game. Each ship class will have a cruise speed and a maximum speed. They're in inches. They will have an attack factor and a defensive factor, and they'll also have a maximum range with their guns. At the start of each turn, I'll be rolling for initiative, and thereafter each fleet will have a d6 of action points. Changing direction or moving at maximum speed will cost 1 action point. However, damage control will cost considerably more, and replacing a silenced marker with a damaged marker, for example, will take 3 action points. In this game, I don't allow crippled ships to recover. When ships are hit, there are various levels of damage, as shown by the coloured chart here, and each of those levels will affect the ship's capabilities accordingly. First turn initiative. We'll go to the Japanese. Admiral Togo, in the lead ship of his fleet, espies the Russians on the horizon. It's full speed ahead. Let's do some action points. 3. Togo gets +2, so that's plenty. They will turn to starboard slightly and go max speed. And the Kasuga and the armoured cruiser Nissan just coming on at the rear there. Admiral Witgeft. Well, there we go, plenty there. He'll continue on his course and go max speed. Each of the fleets are trying to cross the T of the other. And the first of the protected cruisers for the Russians appear, which is the Askold and the Diana. All ships out of range, end of turn. And that is the Russian initiative. They will get the Japanese to go first. That's 3 action points for Togo, plenty there. Again, I think they're just going to keep going on that course at maximum speed. And the range is quickly closing. Yeah, enough action points for Witgeft as well. Now, does he continue on that course? I think he might. Two fleets heading for each other here. It's going to be carnage in a minute. And they're still out of maximum range. Initiative goes to the Japanese. Now we'll get the Russians to move first. Right, action points. Well, that's enough there. So I think he's going to turn to starboard and continue on max speed. Now Togo has nearly been crossed here, so I think he might turn to starboard. Let's see what action points he's got. Well, more than enough there. And actually, they're still all out of long range. It's over 18 inches, so no firing this round either. This initiative is key. Roll again. Ooh, Russians have got it. Witgeft gets 5 action points, plenty there. So he'll go back to port and just probably go to cruise speed, actually, I think. Which is 4. Togo's gang. Yeah, 7, plenty there. Right, well, they'll continue on that course. It's going to be broadside action in a minute. They go maximum speed. Stand by. Witgeft will order his fleet to open fire. Sasarovich and Retvizan will open fire on Asahi, and Pobeda and Peresviet will open fire on the Mikasa. So firstly, firing on the Asahi. It's long range, but there's 2 ships firing. So it's attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. Which is 7, 9, no effect. And exactly the same for firing at Mikasa, 4, 5. Which is 5, 10. Again, no effect. Poor gunnery from the Russians. Well, the Japanese only have 3 ships in range. The Fuji will be firing at the Tsarovich, whereas the Mikasa and the Asahi will be firing at the jobber there, Vizan. Let's do that one first. Exactly the same as the Russians. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. 9, 10, no effect. But the Fuji is firing on her own, so it's attack factor of 3 only against the Tsarovich's defence of 5. 7, 11, no effect. End of turn. Initiative goes to the Japanese. They'll get the Russians to move first. They'll continue at cruise speed and turn to port slightly. Got all the action points there, but plenty there, no problem. And for the Japanese, plenty there as well. I think they'll just continue as they are. Again, cruise speed only. Well, this time the Japanese are opening fire first. It's still long range, so they'll be doubling up on their firing. Mikasa and Asahi again firing at the Retvisan, and Fuji and Shikishima firing at the Tsarovich. Mikasa and Asahi firing first, attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. And that's 5, 9, no effect. And now it's the Fuji and Shikishima, which is 8, 6, and the Tsarovich is damaged. -1 firing for her. Well, unfortunately for the Japanese and Togo, the Russians have more ships that are in range, and they'll be opening fire as pairs. The Tsarovich and Retvizan will open fire on Fuji. Attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. And that's no effect. Pobeda and Perezviet will open fire on the Asahi. 4, 5. 6, 10, no effect. And finally, the Sevastopol and the Askold will be opening fire on Mikasa. 4, 5. 9, 8. And the Mikasa is now damaged, all firing at -1. End of turn. Initiative goes to the Japanese, and they get the Russian to go first. Action points for Witgeft. 6, plenty there. Now, he can't get rid of the damaged token on his ship, so they'll just continue on. I think they'll turn to port again and continue at cruise speed. Action points for Togo. 5, again, damaged ship, can't do anything about it. Now, he can turn and we'll go maximum speed, and I think he'll do that and he'll turn to port. And of course, the Japanese will be opening fire first. Well, it's just close range for Mikasa and the Asahi if they open fire on the Askold, which they will do. Attack factor 4 only because of Mikasa's damage, but a defensive factor of 3 for the Askold because she's a protected cruiser. 4, 3, which is 10, 7, and the Askold is now damaged. Meanwhile, the Fuji and the Shikishima will be firing at the Retvizan. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. 6 all, that's a hit, which means the Retvizan will get a -1 this turn for firing. And finally, the Kasuga and the Nissin will be firing at Tsarovich over here. It is close range, but they are armoured cruisers firing against the battleship, so it's attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. That's 8 all, which is a hit, but Tsarovich is already damaged, so effectively that is no effect. Stand by, Togo. Tsarovich and Retvizan, both damaged and or hit, will be firing at Kasuga. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 4. 6, 5. And that's the Kasuga damaged. Pobeda and Perezviat will be firing at Fuji. Attack factor 4, it is long range. Defensive factor 5. 8 all, hit. Now it's Sevastopol and Askold firing at Asahi. However, because the Askold is damaged and she's a protected cruiser, I'm afraid she can't join in effectively with the broadside. So it's attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. 6-11, no effect. And the final two ships in the Russian line, Diana and Pallada, both protected cruisers, are going to be firing at Mikasa, Togo's flagship. Close range, but it's only an attack factor of 3 and a defensive factor of 5. And that is 4-11, certainly no effect there. Early stages of the battle, and it's 2 damaged ships each. And look at those 2 fleets, they're ready to go into a death spiral. Initiative. Japanese again. Then we'll get the Russians to move first. Action points. Doesn't really need that anyway. It's cruise speed and same course. But I think that leaves Witgeft's protected cruisers at the mercy of the Japanese here. Togo gets plenty of action points there. And I'll tell you what he's up to. It's max speed, same course. And he's going to try and kill off the rear of the Russian fleet. So first of all, it's the flagship Mikasa along with the Asahi, and they'll be pounding the Pallada. Close range, but Mikasa is damaged. So it's attack factor 4, defensive factor 3. Which is 10-8. Damaged. Now the Fuji and the Shikishima will take on the damaged Askold. 5-3. Which is 9-6. So that's another level of damage there, and she goes to silenced. No firing and -1 on defensive factor. She'll also have to roll for morale. Needs a 3+. Gets it, so she'll stay in line. And finally for the Japanese, the Nissin and the damaged Kasuga will open fire on the damaged Cesarevich. Long range, attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. But that's a crunching effort there. 9-6. Another level of damage for Cesarevich. And she's now silenced. So before I do anything, I need to do a morale check for the Cesarevich. This could be very embarrassing for Witgeft. But they're okay there, steadfast. However, Cesarevich will not be able to open fire this round. The Ret Vizan and Pobeda will fire at the Kasuga. Long range, attack factor 4, defensive factor 4. 10-6. And now the Kasuga is silenced. Morale test for her. Also passing. Peresviet and Sevastopol will fire at Shikishima. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. 8-11, no effect. And finally the protected cruisers at the rear of Witgeft's fleet. Askold can't fire because she's silenced. So Diana and Pallada will gang up on the damaged Mikasa. Attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. 6 all. That's a hit, but that's no effect because she's already damaged. End of turn. Initiative. Russians. So this is where action points really come to the fore because they need to use it for damage repair. The Russians will get the Japanese to go first. And that's a poor roll, but Togo is exceptional, so they'll get 3 action points. Which basically means they won't be able to do any repairs and or manoeuvre. And I think Togo here will signal the fleet to turn to port and go max speed. Crossing the T nicely, but of course the Russians have got to move yet. So what about Witgeft? Gets a 6. That's exactly what he needs. So 3 of those are going to be given to damage control. And at the end of the turn, that will mean that the Cesarevich will be back to damaged only. He also has enough action points to go max speed and turn to port. So once again, Cesarevich can't fire because of that damage, which will get cleared at the end of the round. So it's over to the next 2 battleships in line. The Rangers increased to long range, but the Ret Vizin and Pobeda will be firing at the Nissin. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 4. And that's no effect. The Peresviet and the Sevastopol are just in long range of the silenced Kasuga, and she'll get a -1 for defensive factor. So it's 4-3, 8-5, and that's crippled the Kasuga. So she's now dead in the water. It's -2 on a defensive factor. And finally the Diana and the Pallada will fire against the Nissin. It's long range and they're protected cruisers. Attack factor 2, defensive factor 4. And that's no effect. Look out, Russian protected cruisers.
The Mikasa has crossed the T of the Russian fleet. Asahi will join in the fun. 4-2, which is 10-7, and the Pallada is silenced. Immediate morale roll. She also passes it. So over to the Fuji and the Shikishima, and they will open fire on the silenced Askold. Long range, attack factor 4, defensive factor 2. 10-6, and the Askold is crippled. And lastly for the Japanese, the Nissim will open fire on the Diana. Long range, attack factor 2, defensive factor 3. 6-7, no effect. Both fleets taken a heavy hit in that turn, but more importantly for the Russians, damage controllers kicked in with the Tsarevich, and they're now just down to damaged status. End of turn. Quick synopsis and a reminder of the victory conditions. First of all, for Togo's fleet, Mikasa is damaged and she will remain so for the rest of the game, and Kasuga is crippled. That's basically her out of action. For the Russians, Witgeft's flagship is also damaged, the Askold is crippled, and the Pallada is silenced. Now it is advantage to the Russians with regards to their larger numbers. They've got to have 4 ships of their fleet of 8, either crippled, sunk or silenced, versus the Japanese 3. So Togo has got to be very careful here. On to initiative. And that goes to Togo again. And he'll get the Russians to go first. Action points. That is not what Witgeft wanted, because there's no damage repair there. So I think all he can do is turn to port and go maximum speed. And of course, with the Askold being crippled, Diana and Pallada will have to move around her. And I think common sense dictates that they'll go to the starboard side. Righty-ho, Togo, what's happening with you? Right, he's got 8 action points there. He actually can't reduce any damage of any ships, and the Kasuga won't be going anywhere. So hard to port, full speed ahead. And for the Japanese rear ship, the Nissin, she will turn to starboard, exactly like the Russians were doing, and go max chat for her, which is 7. And all of a sudden we've got a very confused picture. Right, let's try and work out some firing. Well, the only ships that are in range at the moment are the Mikasa and the Tsarevich, and the Pallada and the Mikasa. That's obviously not taking into account the 2 crippled ships. So the Japanese will open fire, and it will be the Mikasa against the Tsarevich, long range, attack factor 2, defensive factor 4, which is 7 all hit, but that's no effect because the Tsarevich is already damaged. For the Russians, the Pallada will open fire on the Mikasa. Pallada is damaged, the centre line extends across the target, and she's a protected cruiser. Attack factor 0, defensive factor 5. Funny old thing, no effect. I'm not quite sure this you could do anything anyway. And finally, Tsarevich will open fire on the Mikasa. Attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. 7-8, no effect. And that's the end of turn. Initiative. Russian. Right, let's have a look at some action points. 4. Well, it can expend 3 to get old matey back to damaged only, but that's at the end of turn. Also means they can only do 1 other manoeuvre or speed change, and I think it will be manoeuvre. So cruising speed only, and the main part of the fleet will turn to port. Togo needs to be careful. Gets 4 action points. That's enough, and again, he can't do anything with damage control. And you're going to be a bit cautious. Bear away starboard and cruise speed. Well, it's all long range for firing. The Tsarevich and Retvizan will be firing on the Asahi. 3-5. 7-9, no effect. And the Pobeda and the Peresviet will be firing at Mikasa. 4-5. 5-8, no effect. In order to maximise the Japanese gunnery, I'm going to ignore the Nissin on the right hand side of the screen here and concentrate on pairing up the battleships. So first off, we've got Shikishima and the Fuji firing at the Tsarevich. Long range, attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. And again, that is poor shooting, no effect. And final gunnery for this round is the Asahi and the Mikasa firing on the Retvizan. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. 10-9, another level of damage, and the Tsarevich is silenced. Another squeaky bum moment for Witgeft, morale check. And he's still okay. End of turn. Initiative. Japanese. And before we go for the action point roll, a reminder that Pallada has sorted herself out with damage control and just got back to damaged status. Alright, here we go. 6, excellent. That is 3 points to repair Tsarevich. 3 action points to go. They only need 2. They will turn to port slightly and go maximum speed. The cruisers to the left will do the same, but in their own time. What's old Togo up to? 2 plus 2 is 4. I think he's going to go for the kill. Hard to port, max speed. All of a sudden it's got extremely serious. Both battleships of the fleets are within close range. Japanese are firing first. And I think the sensible thing for Togo is for the Mikasa and the Asahi to go for Retvizan. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. 10-7. Damaged. And that'll be a -1 to the Russians firing. And now the Fuji and the Shikishima will team up to take on the Tsarevich. Attack factor 5, defensive factor 4, because the Tsarevich is silenced. 7-6. Tsarevich is crippled, so that's no damage control for her at the end of the round. She was floundering. Russians are in desperate straits here. The Retvizan and the Pobeda will fire at the Asahi. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. That's a cracking effort there. 9-6. Damaged. And the Peresviet and Sevastopol will be firing on Mikasa, which is already damaged. 5-5. Well, that's no effect. End of turn. Initiative. Oh, it's Japanese again. Action points. 6. No requirement for damage control. Well, it's quite simple for them. It is continuing on that course, cruise speed. Well, of course, Tsarevich is dead in the water now, so the remainder of the fleet are going to have to pass her by. Let's see about the action points. 2. I guess they turn to port, cruise speed. But look out, Mikasa, we've got a couple of protected cruisers here. And they've just crossed your T. Japanese firing first. So I'm thinking that for Togo, he wants to maximise the damage quickly and destroy the Russian battleships and go for victory. Therefore, the Mikasa and the Asahi will go for the Sevastopol at the rear. It's close range, but it's only attack factor 4 because they're both damaged, and defensive factor 5. 6 all. That is a hit, and she'll be -1 firing this turn. Meanwhile, the Fuji and the Shikishima will open fire on the damaged Retvizan. 5-5. 8-7. Silenced. And returning fire for the Russians. Looks like the protected cruisers have crossed the T of the Mikasa. The Diana and the Pallada are going to open fire. Attack factor 3, defensive factor 5. 8 all, which is a hit, but that's no effect. The Peresviet and the Sevastopol will open fire on the Mikasa. Close range. Attack factor 5, defensive factor 5. 9-7. The Mikasa is silenced. And that's bad news for Togo. And the Retvizan and Pobeda will open fire on the Asahi. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 5. Which is 6-10, no effect. So that's the end of round, and what I didn't do there was the morale test for the silenced ships. So first of all, for the Russians, the Retvizan. She's okay, stays in line. And Togo in the Mikasa. Is he going to commit seppuku? No way. He stays there. This is ding dong. End of turn. Initiative. Russians. Oh, critical. They will get the Japanese to go first. Right, let's have some action points for Togo. 4 + 2, 6. Right, so he damage control here. They will turn to port and go maximum speed. And the Russians. 3. Well, I'm thinking again, slightly to port and cruise speed. Meanwhile, I think the protected cruisers will bear away. They might be in trouble here, but they will open fire first on the Macassar. Attack factor 3, defensive factor 4. 8 all. That's a hit, so it's no further damage. Lucky for Togo. I think here Sevastopol and Peresviet will have to target the Macassar. She's already silenced. Let's see if they can do some more damage. Attack factor 5, defensive factor 4. 7, 8, no effect. And final effort this turn for the Russians. The Retvizan and the Pobeda will be firing at the Asahi. Attack factor 5, defensive factor 5. 9, 10, no effect. Japanese gunnery. Togo has seen the easy targets on his starboard side and he orders fire in that direction. The Mikasa and the Asahi will open fire on the Pallada. Attack factor 4, defensive factor 3. 7, 6, and that's the Pallada silenced. And over here we've got the Shikishima and the Nissin firing against the Retvizan. Attack factor 5, defensive factor 4. 11, 8, and Retvizan is crippled. Dead in the water. And finally for the Japanese, the Fuji will open fire on the Sevastopol. 4, 5. And that's no effect. And at the end of that round, the Mikasa managed to get herself damage controlled back to damaged status. But look at the Russian fleet. Cesarevich is crippled. Retvizan is crippled. Askold is crippled. And the Pallada is silenced. I'm afraid that's just not good enough for the Russians. Witgeft is going to have to try and escape. Well, he can't. He's in a floundering ship at the moment. So he'll have to probably surrender. That is a disaster for the Russians. And the Japanese are victorious in the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Well done, the Sons of Nippon. And Tsar Nicholas is not going to be happy with that.